So this is something I've seen pretty heavily discussed over the past couple weeks, and that is the difference between spontaneous immolation, casting a damaging spell has a 5% chance to activate soul immolation for 5 seconds, and tempered soul. The cooldown of soul immolation is reduced by 30 seconds and it gains 1 additional charge. For context, soul immolation, let your soul aflame, dealing fire damage to yourself, pretty inconsequential amount, generating 36 fury and shattering 3 soul fragments over 5 seconds. So the big debate, I suppose, is it better to be able to, and this is 1 minute CD. If you're taking Tempered Soul, it is a 30-second cooldown. But the big debate here is whether, you know, soul immolation is better passively or with that uh tempered soul. And I'm going to use Tempered Soul quickly just as a quick test because I think it's going to provide a lot of context, a lot of useful context. So with Tempered Soul and using an active soul immolation, the big thing to kind of think about is, okay, if I'm playing Havoc or even Vengeance to a degree, when am I using Immolation Aura for those two specs? The answer is unless, besides season 3 of The War Within, where for Fellscarred Havoc, there was the whole lining it up with I-beams and things like that. But generally speaking, the answer is to use it on cooldown. Um, and it would be to use both charges. The problem with doing that philosophy, and for context, I'm playing a full range single target build because that's, I think, the most consistent for this scenario. But if I start doing my rotation, I'll use Consume, I'll pop Soul Immolation, and then, I start my ramp, do my thing, Void Ray, pop into Immo, or into meta here, and then I can kind of do my thing. I'm going to pop Soul Immolation again because I'm in meta now. And, like, you can see that I've staggered this. But now, I just have... There's a lot... You're very much... you're forced into having these soul immolation windows. But once you're not in those, you basically kind of start to suffocate a little bit. And obviously, I mean, I misplayed. Like, I put my Void Ray on cooldown before leaving meta. But I've been waiting, 20 seconds or whatever to get my soul immolation back. And that's only one charge. So, but on single target, obviously isn't going to feel super awesome. In Mythic Plus, this is where I've seen people kind of start to use manual soul immolation because they'll use it when they're going into a pack. And I get that on paper, but I think at the end of the day, and this is something we've kind of talked about too, but and I'm using Soul Glutton just because the difference, like, it's mostly just to get me into meta faster for the purpose of showcasing. But the idea is still the same, that since this 5% chance isn't, and I think a good example is to think of like a trinket. So with both of these trinkets, I'm wearing Heart of Wind and Soul Catcher's Charm. My damaging spells have a chance, which it's a percentage chance, but generally with those types of things, they can be affected by haste and other different variables, but they generally are sort of restricted to like 1 proc per minute. With soul immolation, or rather with spontaneous immolation, it is just a flat 5% chance every time you cast a damaging spell. The reason why this is important is we are so haste dependent that if I start my rotation again, yeah, my initial ramp might be a little slower, but since we're carrying around so much haste with us, I already procced one. But since we're carrying around so much haste with us, And if I was playing, especially if I was playing Emptiness right now, I would be procking the chance to proc, um, spontaneous immolation is just so much higher since you're casting all the time. And I mean, it might not feel great to, have to low roll and high roll that, but and especially if you're playing Annihilator, um, you're procking, like, you're pressing consume so much anyway. And I've heard the kind of argument as well that, like, oh well, if they buff Reap, like, you won't, if they buff other spells, you won't press consume that much or as much, which I don't really agree with that. If Reap gets buffed, yeah, we could even end up taking the second charge of Reap, but at the end of the day, it's not going to, you're still going to be casting a lot of consume. That really, I don't see that changing. But in terms of talking about, like, which is better strictly, um between active immolation aura and a passive, or sorry, soul immolation, between active soul immolation and passive soul immolation, me personally, I would rather just run the passive option, because especially as we get, higher in the tiers, we get more stats, and especially with how much we want haste, because I mean, we wanted mastery for a week and then they nerfed it, so we went back to just wanting haste on everything. um Something like this is just going to scale better over the course of an expansion as a whole. But even if we're just strictly talking about season one, since we're so stacked into one stat, I don't see a world where Tempered Soul is really better in any specific scenario. Maybe in specific packs and plus where you're able to very much play around this, but I don't think the spec benefits from gameplay that's centered around, oh, well, if I don't have, if I'm waiting my 30 seconds for, um my active charge of soul immolation to pop up. If I don't have that, I'm screwed for this pack. If you want to have Tempered Soul be a little more competitive, I would just, and don't give it more cooldown reduction. I don't think that's this answer either. But just have it generate more resources. Because I'm not even taking the Singe Spirit, because this just isn't a great. This is like one consume if you're playing. It's a little more than one consume if you're playing Annihilator, but even if you're playing Void Scarred, like, this just isn't really worth it for majority of scenarios. Um, but I would say, and especially for beta testing, play which one you're more comfortable with, and we kind of just have to see what the damage gap is between the two. And it might be a little more wishy-washy in that Mythic Plus, where, maybe you can have your tank pull around that. But I would say in Raid especially, Spontaneous Immolation is probably just going to win out all day. Um, Obviously, until we get more official numbers for everything. But especially with kind of the current dominance of, like, an Annihilator ranged build, the frequency at which you get these, Spontaneous Immolation procs is more than enough for the spec to feel good. And I'd really rather see Soul Immolation with Tempered Soul more so just get more resources out of it, rather than just saying, oh, you can use it more. Which I think that would just have to be, in general, a Fury and Soul Fragment buff to Tempered Soul specifically, not to the base ability. I know this is probably a little shorter than what I make most of my videos. I will probably have a video kind of going over the new Mythic Plus dungeons on Wednesday. And hopefully with some cool class changes to boot as well, depending on if we get those or not next week. But for now, that is where I will leave you. But I hope everyone has a good week, and make sure to like and subscribe.